So when you're doing these complex numbers and equations, you have to remember that I, imaginary number to the second power, is going to default to -1. When you're first learning them, um, a lot of teachers go ahead and say it's always -1. Okay, so you just keep it here. It can be different when you're doing derivatives. It can be something else. So not that this will be something else, but doing derivatives becomes something else. So they said write it in the form of a plus bi. See, and here's another thing you have to do, which is why when you write in this form, you're going to see that I have two answers in most of this, but because you were told to write in the form of a, the number, plus b times an imaginary number, this is why this changes. Okay, now if I2 is always here, you're written as 1. This I by itself is called, it's kind of like a conjugate. And what you do is you take, this is positive I. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, this is positive I. So you're going to take positive I, and you're going to take, that sounds like you're about to write like something else, like tie your shoe or something, but I'm not. You're going to take positive I, and you're going to turn it into its opposite, which is negative I. Negative I times 2, you're going to see what happens. This is negative I, you're doing the conjugate. Okay, just accept that and learn this word here. Okay, not conjugate a verb, not take a verb, not when you're learning Spanish and you go, estar to estoy. It's not that kind of conjugate. Just learn this word and let's move on. Okay, so now you're taking the positive I times this, because really what you're trying to do is get rid of this imaginary number. When you multiply this I times this, it becomes 2I. Why aren't you taking this I over to this side? Because you don't have a bracket around this. So without the bracket, you only have to worry about, this is the biggest trick that when people are taking the advanced placement test, they get confused with. And to be honest with you, it's a confusing thing. So hats off to anybody who tried it. Okay, now you have I times I. Now what's going on here? I times positive I gives you 2I squared. What's going to go on here is you're going to get I squared. You're going to get -1 times 2, which is eventually going to give you -2. And you're going to keep 5I over here and leave them alone. This is an addition sign, guys. It's an addition sign over a division bar. How horrible. Okay, so now your negatives are going to become positives, because now what you're going to do is you're going to take this I2 and turn it into a -1. Is this complicated? Of course it is. Just try to stay followed. Okay, because you squared them. A lot of people say, why do you have to do that? Why can't you just add straight? Silly, stupid mathematician rules from all these smart people that came up with ways to make things complicated. Accept it. Okay, this 2 times this -1 is going to become -2. This I squared is going to become a -1. Okay, we don't write this here anymore. This is gone. I just wanted you to see the rule. This -4 times this -4 is going to become a +4. And this is 5I minus 2. Are we done? No. Do you remember it said A plus BI? All right, guys. Since it said it, you have to turn around the number that doesn't have the coefficient, and then you have to put this here. You had a negative sign here, so the negative gets cast in the middle, and you switch around these numbers. Does that make sense? No, but that's the way it is. Okay, so that's how you do this, and this is your answer. And a lot of, if you were taking a standardized test or any other kind of test, I guarantee you they'd have this answer and you get it wrong. You'd have 5i over 4 minus a half. And the reason it's a half, by the way, is because this can be reduced. Okay, if you left it at 2/4, most of your teachers will let you do it. Thank you. 3 minus 2i over 4 minus 3i. It's really 4 minus 3i divided into 3 minus ti, but it doesn't matter as long as you look at it. Let's say this, if ever you want to get rid of this imaginary number, you have to use something called a conjugate. And it's the mathematical conjugate. It's not conjugate and like it is in English, but you've got to use the opposite. So let's take a look. Also, remember that I squared is -1. I is not -1. Okay? Regular I is just I, and I'm doing I with a tail. So this is what you have to look at, and this is something you have to remember. And again, just accept it. It doesn't make any sense. It's called a complex number because this is really an imaginary number. And when things are imaginary, they do imaginary things. And that's all you have to know. Okay, when you do 3 minus 2i over 4 minus 3i, you have to use the conjugate. So the conjugate of this is 4 plus 3. So do you see how this is a minus sign? And now this is a plus sign. So you take this to both sides of the equation. Now the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to do the top, which this is here called the numerator. So let's move on. When you do that, remember you have to FOIL because you've got to get this into one bad equation. Okay, you got to make this and when I say bad, I guess I'm trying to be, both baby boomerish and Generation Z and trying to appeal to you. So this is 3 times 4, and that's positive. So this goes over here as positive 12. Okay, I'm only going to put the positive on for the video, but that's a positive 12. This then becomes 3 times 3i, which over here is in purple is 9, imaginary number, or 9i. This becomes -2 times 4, that's -8i. This becomes 2, I have this in orange, -2. Remember, this is -2 times 3i. Negative times a positive is a negative, but here's an I here, so that's I to the first power. This is I to the first power, so that becomes -6i to the second power. Okay, so we did that. Okay, now we have this over here, and these parts are all done. They're done, but we've got to do the bottom. So what are we going to do here? Can you look here? This is going to be 16. This is going to be positive 12i. This is going to be -12i. And what do you think is going to happen to that term? Somebody say it's going to get gotten rid of? This is because of the bracket. You are multiplying -3i times -3i is going to be 9i. So let's go on to the next slide, and there you have it. But this term, these two terms actually cancel each other out. That becomes 0. So in actual fact, you have 16 plus a -9i squared. What's the first thing we say? I squared equals -1. So what are we going to do? We're going to go ahead and write it this way. We canceled out the -8 and the +1, and that became a positive I. Be careful. It's late. And when you're doing things at the last minute, or you're doing things when it's late, because I was tempted to say if I hadn't done this before, this is a negative I. It's not. Just because I did it in green. It's positive because 9 is the bigger number. So you're here. This is still down here at the bottom. You're making this smaller. What's going to go on? This I squared equals -1, so it gets added into. What about this? This is going to be a -1 too. Okay, but this negative is going to get multiplied by this negative, and that's going to be a -9 times a -1. You have to memorize your powers rules, and that's going to be a +9. This is going to be a -6 times a -1, and that's going to be a +6. You have some like terms over here. Let's see what we do with them. We go ahead and we make them like terms. We combine this 12, and please note that this 12 is a plus. This is not a sign. This 12 here is a plus sign. So this means to go 12 plus 6, which equals 18. So that's 18, and still this is positive plus I. We canceled out these two. And then what about the bottom? This was -1. Negative times negative is 9. So you have 16 plus 9. And this is just a reminder down here. 18 plus I over 25. You cannot reduce. 3 does not go into 25 evenly. 3 does go into 18 evenly. 5 goes into 25 evenly, but 5 does not go into 18. You cannot reduce. You can either leave it like this, because your teacher should understand that that means that both of these share the denominator, or you can go ahead and separate them like this just so the teacher knows. Why does this I stay like this? Because it's the original imaginary number. When you get to calculus, they start assigning these numbers as something, but for right now, I squared is the only thing that gets changed. So this is your original equation, and there you are. You are done with this problem. Over -2 plus I. Now, this whole part here is a conjugate because you have a plus sign. Okay, your conjugate is going to be the opposite for the I, which is why you're going to see -I. Excuse me. Whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. So you are taking the opposite of this, -2 minus I. You have to do it to both sides. What do you do next? These are brackets. They mean to multiply. And we'll do it in the next step. I'm sorry about this. I'm putting like these little types of it, but this word does spell multiply. Okay, so you multiply, and we're going to show how we do that on next screen. Okay, so next screen we're going to FOIL because we have brackets. Do we always FOIL when we have brackets? 98% of the time. How is everyone? This is some long-winded stuff. Okay. -3I times -2. You can't get this. It's -6I. This does not have an I, so you do not square it. If you did, you would. -3I minus I is -3I squared, because this I goes with this I. -2 times -2 is +4. -2 times -I is a -2I. That's this number here. I times -2, I just did. This is -2 times -I. Okay, guess what? Those two numbers together, -2, -I, becomes a +2I. You have to remember all these little rules, and it's not something you want to learn at the last minute. This here is a -I times this guy, and that becomes -I squared. So we have the next part, but we haven't condensed it. In case you're wondering, you can subtract these. You're going to know that these two are going to come down to 0. So let's move on. Get rid of them. They're 0. When you get rid of these two guys, they're gone, never existed. No, I'm just kidding. It's 4 minus I squared. This is going to become positive, isn't it? Okay, let's move on. Negative 6i plus 3. Guess what? You had a 4 minus I squared. What's going on? This is a negative already here, negative, negative 1. 4 plus 1 is here. It's negative 6i plus 3. That's 6i plus 3 is 5. What are you supposed to do here? Form of a plus bi. So what are we going to do? If this was not here, if this wasn't here, this would be correct. But guess what? We got to take this or out. This is going to be 3/5 minus 6i over 5. If this wasn't here, you could almost write this like this, but it's not the way it works. This is the correct formula, 3/5 minus 6i over 5. If your teacher weren't making these a little bit harder for you, they just said, write the quotient, for these numbers, you'd be okay. But this is here. So we've got to make sure we have everything turned around and done correctly. Okay? Any questions? We're at jacobitslearning@gmail.com.